In this video, I'm going to show you what I needed to learn in order to create my own piece of work inspired by this, The Pool of London by Andre Derain. Here is an example of what you will be able to create by the end of this short video tutorial. So let's start with how Derain himself was able to create a believable 3D perspective. As you can see, I have drawn in some pink lines that show you something that's called the vanishing point. All the diagonal lines of the ships and some of the background as well pretty much flow into this single vanishing point, getting smaller the further they go away from us. And it's this effect that makes things look three-dimensional. So here's a real-life example of one-point perspective. Look at this cylinder. Notice how the side edges are straight. But when I start to point one end towards you and one end away, it seems to shrink and get smaller the further away from us it goes. So how do we create this effect in a drawing? Well, what we need to do is start with the edge of the shape that's closest to us. In this case, a square and a circle. Then I'm going to mark out the vanishing point, which will guide my 3D drawing. So I'm going to connect the edge of the shapes, marked with arrows, to the vanishing point. And already you can see how 3D it looks. Now, because the shape here of the cylinder starts with a circle, it must also end with one. And the edges of that end circle must also touch those diagonal lines. I'm just going to go over it, define it a little bit more, and rub some pieces out so you can see that 3D cylinder really starting to take shape, like so. I can do the same thing with a square, but this time I'm going to join up these three corners to the vanishing point. I don't need to bother with the bottom right corner because that's going to be hidden by the rest of the shape. Doesn't matter about having wobbly lines. The Fauvists didn't mind, so why should we? It's a sketch, it's an experiment. I'm trying to learn from this. I'm not obsessed over fine detail and perfect straight lines. Now watch this. I'm going to draw in each side of the shape one at a time as it gets smaller and goes away from us. Notice how the end vertical line of the square is similar to the vertical line that's closest to us. It's just smaller because it's further away. Here we go. Now I can start rubbing out some of the lines to make this appear even more three-dimensional. Just tidy up some of my edges so I know which lines I will keep and which ones I will rub out. By adding a little bit of shading, darker on one side, lighter on the other, and nothing on the face, I can just accentuate the 3D illusion of this shape. So now let's experiment with a few more shapes. Here I'm just drawing a variety of circles and rectangles, and I'm connecting them to vanishing points, but I'm putting the vanishing points in different places. I'm following exactly the same steps as before, making sure the edges of the circles touch the edge of those diagonal perspective lines. And all I need to do is decide how long I want that shape to be. Because if it flows off towards the vanishing point, then it gives the impression that it keeps on going forever and ever. And I just want to end that in a very specific place, just by putting in those final lines. So you can see where the shape begins and where it ends. When it comes to your work and your own practice and experiments, draw in various squares, rectangles and circles and experiment with where you place the vanishing point, not forgetting to connect up the appropriate sides of the shape to that vanishing point, and experiment with how that affects the shape and the angle of what you're drawing. Now here's a challenge for you. What I want you to do is to draw one shape exactly the same way as we've just been practicing, except this time what I'd like you to do is try to put another shape on top. Now I'm making sure that this square sits nicely on top of the one underneath. I'm using the same vanishing point to connect up the corners in exactly the same way as I did on the shape underneath. The only difference is this smaller one is sitting on top. When you're adding the end points to both shapes, it can get a little bit confusing, but if you follow the same steps as before, you will be able to create this new shape where it almost appears a bit like a car or a bit like a boat with a cabin on top of the main section or the hull of that boat. Try it for yourself. Don't be worried if it feels a bit difficult. Experiment, try your best and see what happens. Enjoy creating your own 3D shapes.